As you can see, my name's Terry Sexton. I'm one of the team running the hub. And as you may know, at the hub, we're a growing community of researchers and practitioners exploring thought leadership in how internal development enables the transformation of organisations. And that's for the benefit of all stakeholders, be they shareholders, customers, communities, employees, and the natural environment, of course. Our environment is a key stakeholder. So transforming organisations to enable the benefit for all of those stakeholders. And each month we're inviting a guest speaker to lead an interactive webinar. And tonight it's with pleasure that I welcome Dr. Jessica Bockler as our speaker. And Jessica is an applied artist, transpersonal psychologist, and co-founder of the Alef Trust. She serves as a deputy CEO and works across Alef Trust's academic and applied portfolios. And Jessica specialises in integral theory, creativity, transpersonal research methods, and the application of transpersonal psychology in service of global regeneration and flourishing. Trained in applied and physical theatre, Jessica has extensive experience of expressive arts facilitation, as well as experimental movement and voice work. She specialises in embodied approaches to accessing creativity and imagination. And in tonight's webinar, Jessica will view the Inner Development Goals framework through a lens of transpersonal psychology to reveal how it can be used to foster our interconnectedness with nature, with each other, and our spiritual selves to enable organisational transformation. So welcome, Jessica. Welcome to this webinar, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Terry. And it's a pleasure to see so many friends here. Thank you for joining this session. And yeah, it's wonderful to get this going. I'm excited to see how the Transforming Organizations Hub will develop over the months and the years to come. I hope it will be a space where people will really feel free to engage in dialogue, in experimentation with practice, and share stories as well for how we can bring more transpersonal perspectives to inner development and how we can bring inner development into organizations, which of course is a big question in our time. So welcome, and I'm really happy to get this session going, get us started. Today feels like quite a potent day. For those of you who are based in the UK, of course, you know that it is Guy Fawkes Day. This is a day, for those outside of the UK, it's a day associated with quite an infamous gunpowder plot, which took place in 1605, where a group of English Catholics planned to blow up Parliament to assassinate the Protestant King James of Scotland, England, and Ireland, and to replace him with a Catholic head of state. So it was a kind of an attempt to trigger an uprising to improve the conditions for Catholics. But the plot was foiled just a few hours before the fuse was lit. And why am I telling you all of this? Because it feels sort of poignant. We also have today in the United States the presidential election, and I think in both instances, on both occasions, that there is this sense that we're partaking in something that feels we're dealing with oppression, we're dealing with polarization, we're dealing with sort of deep-seated partisanship, and it sort of feels very symbolic for our times. So all of this feels like a potent day to hold this session, and I felt to open it, it would make sense to invite in a little bit of loving kindness and to anchor us through a kind of transitional pause and a little bit of meditation, to invite in gentleness, kindness, compassion towards ourselves and others in this world, which is something that feels so lacking. So just to help us arrive and land a little more fully, I'd like to invite you to settle in, to come home to yourself, close your eyes for a moment. I'll do the same. I'll join in. And I invite you to connect more fully to yourself. And you might notice feet on the floor and the connection that you have with the seat beneath you. And see if you can anchor into these 2 points, feeling more deeply into the feet, connecting you to the earth. And see if you can more fully inhabit your feet. Can you feel your feet more fully? And as you're sensing and feeling into your feet, can you feel the ground beneath your feet? That sense of connection to the deeper ground that holds you, holds all of us. Feeling like you're anchoring into that, feeling held. Letting the breath settle into your feet. So as you're breathing in, you're anchoring, feeling grounded. And then let's bring our attention to the pelvis and our sitting bones connecting with the chair. And again, can you feel how your pelvis is like a bowl holding you, holding your life energy, cradling your torso? And I invite you to really sense into that, inhabit that bowl, this pelvic region more fully. And again, direct the breath into the pelvic region, into the lower half of the torso, feeling a little more anchored, grounded, centered. And then I invite you to feel those 2 points, those 2 anchors at the same time, if you can. Feeling your feet and feeling the pelvis. Feeling into this sense of anchor, sense of ground. And from this sense of anchoring, feeling grounded, I invite you to repeat these words to yourself. May I be safe and well. May I find peace and live with ease. May you be safe and well. May you find peace and live with ease. May all beings be well. May all beings be safe and well. May all beings find peace and live with ease. Taking a deeper breath in and out. And then softly opening your eyes. Taking a moment to stretch. Coming back to the room. Thank you. And then I'd like to invite you to use the chat window to post a little hello. Let us know where you're calling in from. It's nice to see who's in the room. And maybe you want to share a little bit about what kind of a weather are you experiencing today internally? If you were to use the metaphor of weather, what kind of weather is alive in you today? Just taking a moment to feel into that. Hello from South Africa, Wendy. Lovely to have you here. Yeah, great. Oh, and a London in Ontario, Canada. Unseasonably warm. Yeah. I'm just giving you another moment. Whilst you're typing, I'll just share that whilst we were engaging in this transitional pause, we have a little dog here at home, and he's quite activated, stimulated by the fireworks that are going off. So I had a little dog barking in the background whilst sensing into the ground and trying to remain centered and peaceful with the little dog barking away. Yeah, the fireworks aren't good for animals. Hello from Lancashire, lovely. And from London, hi Barbara, and hello Henry, good to have you here. Lovely. And hello to David as well, lovely to have you here as well from Liverpool. Yeah. Malaga, fantastic. Doreen, welcome. That's lovely, thank you so much. It's really lovely to hear you checking in. So I'm going to take us into a presentation that I've put together, and I will pause at times for reflections, for moments of practice, sensing in together. Let me just open the screen share and get my slides set up, and I'm going to take it away. So here it comes. So I hope you can see that well. I'm just going to enlarge this a little bit more so that it's nice and big for you. Okay, here we go. So yes, inner development, and inner development from a transpersonal perspective. What might that mean? What does that mean? I'd like to, in this session, cover both a short overview of the current situation, reflecting on where we're at, and then move us forward into looking at the role of inner development in the world today, in helping us transition to a better world, a more beautiful world, and also how transpersonal psychology can specifically play a role in that. So we will look at the notion of the crisis, our global attempt to address our predicaments, the sustainable development goals, then that sense of, oh, we're making insufficient progress. And why is that? And this question that has come up around inner capacity. What is it that we can do from an inner perspective, an interior perspective, to improve the status quo, to change things, to transform things? Then considering there the role of the inner development goals, and from there then move us into the potential of transpersonal psychology and the role it has to play in broadening perhaps, or supporting or creating a supportive container for ideas around inner development and the inner development goals. And as I mentioned earlier as well, there will be moments of practice in this and plenary reflections as well. So let's move forward and let us look at the current situation. And I won't dwell there for long. I think we've all heard enough to understand that we are in difficult circumstances. So, call it an omni-crisis, a polycrisis, meaning crisis, epistemic crisis. I've heard all of these, a meta-crisis. We hear all those terms. We hear them regularly in different contexts, and they all attempt in one way or other to describe the global situation that we're now experiencing. And really at the heart of it, there is this sense that there are multiple crises which are globally interconnected, and they're reinforcing one another, creating these complex and emergent risk scenarios that we cannot predict. A short quote here from the Global Risks Report 2023 by the World Economic Forum, and I quote, "Concurrent shocks, deeply interconnected risks, and eroding resilience are giving rise to the risk of polycrises, where disparate crises interact such that the overall impact far exceeds the sum of each part," end of quote. In the terms of philosophers like Daniel Schmachtenberger and Terry Patton, they refer to it as a meta-crisis. And by that, they attempt to go beyond the externalities of the polycrisis, really weaving in the inner dimensions, the psychological and the social dimensions. And you see on screen here a quote which has been attributed to the work of Daniel Schmachtenberger in the Civilization Research Institute. I tried to find this quote on the website. It may have been removed. I found it on a Substack article called Explaining the Polycrisis and Metacrisis. And I can give the links later on. I'll post some links in the chat window for you. But essentially, the metacrisis, and I quote, points to a deeper pattern that connects all risks and crises into a single coherent field. I wonder how coherent that is. An ecosystem of crisis dynamics with its own emergent properties. It points towards the human experience, to the complexity and the increasing confusion at the heart of how we all perceive, understand, and operate across the field of converging risks. The metacrisis is a higher order whole with unique dynamics and unforeseen consequences. The metacrisis is both seen and unseen, taking place above and below the surface of what is visible and obvious, end of quote. So there we are. There is this sense that things are not okay and that we need to address our global predicament through a comprehensive strategy. And many of us know that in 2015, the United Nations introduced the Agenda 2030, and at the heart of this agenda is this set of 17 Sustainable Development Goals with 169 targets aiming to move us towards a future promising everyone an equitable opportunity for peace, for prosperity on a healthy and thriving planet. Such is the ideal. But we are far from the ideal, and the SDGs have been critically regarded by many, but are still upheld in a way as a kind of psychological totem, I would say, around which to gather humanity to move us towards more sustainable, more regenerative ways of being. So however imperfect, the SDGs can be seen as a kind of global call, a rallying call to end poverty, to protect the earth, and to ensure that all people are able to flourish. So many organizations and communities are now attempting to take actions to help achieve the SDGs in ways that are relevant to their operations and their mission. However, follow the news and you know that there is this sense of insufficient progress towards achieving the SDGs. And many people are asking, where are we going wrong? And so we come to the inner capacity question and the inner development goals. There are many who are asserting now that this lack of progress that we're experiencing is due to a lack of inner capacities to deal with our increasingly complex world and the challenges it presents. We have technical competence and skills, but we lack in inner competencies and a collective will, political will, social will, economic will, to take the necessary actions. And so, depending on whom you read, what is said is that what is lacking are our inner mindsets and capacities to recognize these inner dimensions as the causes of all these crises and as a way of addressing them. And so it was between 2019 and 2020 that a group of adult development scholars gathered on Eckerö Island, which is near Stockholm in Sweden, including people like Otto Scharmer, Peter Senge, Robert Keegan, and they collaboratively authored the Growth That Matters manifesto, emphasizing the need for systemic human growth in adults to address these societal complexities. And this work was facilitated by the Swedish Eckerö Foundation, and it connected various stakeholders, organizations that were aligned with the vision of inner growth for outer change, really with the goal to create a framework that would simplify the complex field of inner development for more effective communication to enable greater understanding and greater accessibility to inner development so that more people would want to engage with it. And I became aware of this work around 2021, 22, and became involved at that point early on, working with some of the scientific advisors, looking at the data that emerged from the first survey that was put out by the Inner Development Goals Initiative. This survey was really eliciting opinions and perspectives by experts in inner development, so-called experts, practitioners, scholars, who put forward ideas, practices, and concepts and principles that they felt were essential to inner development. And the data analysis gave rise to the identification of 23 core skills, you could say, that were then organized into the 5 dimensions that you see here on screen. And then following that work, around 3,000 people contributed to the development of the first toolkit, which is an open source resource that provides all kinds of practices for skill development in these 5 dimensions. Now, what was also recognized over time was that there was quite a Western-centric bias in this model, because many of the people who came forward and gave their ideas about, in regard to inner development were Western researchers, people based in the United States and in Europe, who had particular ways of thinking and conceptualizing ideas around inner development. So more recently, the Inner Development Goals Initiative also launched another more global survey to invite in more responses from more nations, from more people around the world. And this movement has really grown now. It's involving some 80 countries around the world, some 650 active hubs, involving many practitioners and organizations working in grassroots, but also in kind of political areas and in organizations around the world. So you can see here, there are these 5 core categories that revolve around being, thinking, relating, collaborating, and acting. And they all add up to a kind of rounded picture of, well, or you might want to challenge that, and we'll explore that a little bit further in a moment, but they aim to add up to a kind of rounded picture of inner development, bringing about that kind of cultivation of our inner life, deepening our relationship to ourselves and others. That's the being dimension. Cultivating our cognitive skills, for example, by taking different perspectives and encouraging critical thinking. That's the thinking domain. Then relating, putting that to the fore, appreciating, caring for others, feeling connected to others. Collaborating as an area where we develop our abilities to be more inclusive, to hold space, to communicate with people from many different walks of life, people who hold different values and different perspectives from us. And then also acting as the last domain there, encouraging optimism to support our sense of agency, acting with persistence, with kind of perseverance, and creativity in these very uncertain times of ours. So that is the kind of overarching aim of the framework, to kind of cultivate all these dimensions of the human being. But there have been a number of criticisms that have been raised in regard to the inner development goals. And I'd like to dwell a little bit there with you now. And after I've done that, I want to pause and see what you think and feel about all of this before we then move to looking at inner development through integrative and transpersonal lenses. So kind of broadening the scope a little bit in terms of how we see inner development and its role in helping us move towards a better future. So some of the criticisms, let's have a look at those. And I think they are very interesting. And they've also been acknowledged more and more by the Inner Development Goals Initiative. There have been a number of articles that have been written, and some of these criticisms are also addressed on the website of the initiative. So here is the first. The Inner Development Goals are tethered to the SDG framework, which has been criticized for being siloed, unreflective. I'm hearing a little bit, can I just double check there? A pause for a moment. I'm hearing someone else speak in the background. That's quirky. That must be something at my end. Let me just pause there for a moment. I just want to make sure that whatever is running in the background there is turned off. Bear with me a moment. That's very interesting what's going on there. Okay. Right, I've resolved that at my end. There was a YouTube now that started playing by itself, and I started hearing that alongside my own narrative. But okay, back to point one, in regard to critically considering the IDG framework. So the IDGs are tethered to the SDG framework, which has been criticized for being kind of siloed, right? Unreflective of the complexity of the world, and also impossible to measure in some instances. So Jonathan Rowson, whose work I enjoy very much, from Perspectiva, he wrote about the SDGs as a kind of imperfect political totem. He used that term, something for people to rally around. But we might question whether the entire orientation of the SDGs is wrong, and therefore also the IDG framework. Why? Because it kind of fits into an existing mindset, a kind of industrialized mindset, breaking things down, fragmenting them into separate, silos or containers for what we need to address. There's something quite industrial about how the SDGs are approached, and possibly the IDGs. So are they fit for purpose? Will they take us towards a more healthy, more integrative world? Are they taking into consideration also the more than human? These are some questions that we can sit with. Also, the point has come up that the term inner, for many people, refers to the kind of internal of the individual rather than the collective. The IDG team respond to that and say, no, inner has collective dimensions. Yes, the term often is interpreted as implying individual personal growth, but collectives have interiority, right? They have values, they have principles, they have a culture and ethos. So that's fair enough. The collective interior is recognized in the framework. But you might ask, how is it honored in practice? How are our cultural and social fields considered? How are the affordances that these cultural fields make? How are they considered? and the limitations they impose, right? How cultures and social social circles, great Freudian slip there, how they constrain us, how they might limit us. How is that considered within the framework? Is it really showing up? And something that I would highly recommend reading there is the work by Eva Pomeroy and Lucas Herrmann from the Presencing Institute. They wrote a paper on social fields, knowing the water we swim in, which came out in early 2024. So it's in the Journal of Applied Behavioral Science. Again, I can post some links later on. Then there is this question around inner development, and it feels so intangible. How do you measure inner qualities and personal growth? They feel less quantifiable and less measurable. Some people are seeing that as a problem. And they're asking, how does one measure self-awareness or empathy? And can these intangible goals be universally applied given our diverse cultural and societal contexts? And the response from the IDG team is, well, it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. The framework doesn't represent a curriculum. It's intentionally kept relatively naked or decontextualized so that it can be recontextualized within specific settings. So you can read in, you can interpret the framework in a way that works for you in the context that you're in. I want to add something to that. And I do see that entire line of criticism as somewhat problematic. I want to say thank goodness that inner growth is seen as somewhat intangible, because there is a kind of danger that the inner development goals framework might just affirm a kind of culture that revolves around standardization, scalability, measurable progress. So again, this kind of industrial mindset within which we find ourselves, which is sort of like the water that we swim in. So should we be making personal growth quantifiable, measurable? Will that not lead to a risk that people are or end up being reduced to performance metrics, right? Can you imagine linking stages of development, stages of consciousness to career development in organizations, to promotion? So, again, how can we ensure that inner development doesn't become a kind of performative action, but really honors the depth of the human being and brings about that sense of wholeness and vulnerability, which inner development is predicated on? So there is a kind of danger then that the IDGs could be co-opted into a culture of more superficial progress and growth. And you might say that there is a problem with the progress narrative overall. We're sort of too focused on productivity and measurement, even in inner work, right? In the sort of marketplace of personal development that we now have. This sense of doing more to improve yourself rather than leaning back, coming home to yourself, resting in, or fixing yourself according to some external metric, accumulating growth points. I can think of a number of apps there that encourage us to think in those quantifying ways, rather than working with kind of intrinsic motivation. Inviting us to come home to ourselves, inviting us to rest in and to tend to our healing. I like the work of Jonathan Rowson a lot. He's written a critique of the IDGs, and he sums up the justification for the IDGs in the following way. And I think this is a lovely quote, which sort of gives a sense for the motivation at play. So I'll read this quote to you. You could call it a kind of marketing or gateway drug to deeper forms of psychotechnology and contemplative and spiritual practices. We accept there is deeper insight available and deeper forms of practice and inquiry to be done. However, such things often remain niche, and they only become affordances for larger numbers of people once the very idea of exploring interiority becomes a cultural affordance. And that's the ground we're preparing. End of quote. But are we preparing the ground? Or are we, in fact, simply maintaining a problematic mindset? I simply want to raise that question. I'm not making a judgment call either way, but I am sitting with that question as I'm feeding into the inner development goals and how they are applied and scaled and brought into so many different contexts. Then I also want to bring up another point, and that revolves around an intriguing omission that happened in the early development of the framework. And that concerns the concept of frugality. Frugality was an idea that came up in the early data that was gathered, but later on it was omitted from the framework. I can't tell you why the concept was dropped. I don't know why that happened. But I would like to offer some reflections around that, because I think there's something interesting here for us to consider. The idea of frugality points to a way of negation, to do less, to make do with less, to accept that less might be better. And saying this, you might already get a kind of sense for why that idea was dropped. Because in our predominant culture, less is not seen as better, right? In a world focused on economic growth, less doesn't feel so comfortable. But then many are already questioning this notion of indefinite growth in a kind of finite world, right? We're entering into a post-growth era. And models are emerging, like Kate Raworth's donut economics, that are honoring both the foundational needs of people around the world and the Earth's ecological ceiling. So we're recognizing that we cannot remain in this perpetual overshoot of the Earth's boundaries. We cannot keep growing indefinitely. We're recognizing that we are moving beyond the Earth's limits, and the Earth will no longer be able to self-regulate. These boundaries are leading, the overshoot is leading to a collapse of systems that have sustained us for millennia. Presently, we're transgressing 6 of the 9 assessed planetary boundaries. Again, if you want to find out more about that work, look at what the Stockholm Resilience Center is doing. Look at their website and you can see the data there. So there are questions here as to what may be seen as valid and as valuable in the IDG framework. And in the industrial mindset, personal growth and growth is something that is cumulative. We accumulate skills, we grow our capacities, and bigger and better sort of feels better. Sorry, bigger and higher feels better than something smaller or something lesser. Just feel into that, right? How much do you sense that internally in your own lifestyle, in your own work? How often are you striving for the bigger and the better, the bigger and the higher? And how often are you striving for the smaller and the lesser? Small is beautiful, but can we believe that? Have we been so indoctrinated to think that bigger is better, higher is better? Yeah. And yet in spiritual terms, the way of negation is central. It's about releasing. It's about letting go. In indigenous practices, rites of initiation involve entering liminal states, relinquishing ego identity. So there's a recognition that death is an essential part of life, but our culture is not very comfortable with that notion of death, that something has to die in order to transform or to be reborn. So doing less, being less, and accepting death or relinquishment as a way towards transformation feels less comfortable. A transpersonal perspective can be really helpful here, but we'll come back to that later on. So I'll make one last point, and then I'm going to pause for a bit of questions and reflections. But this last point kind of ties into the former point I've just made, and it's an important one as well. And it has to do with transcendence. So what about transcendence and the inner development goals? It fits our current culture to think, to deal with our collaborative, our collective problems, we need to change ourselves in certain ways, right? We change our mindsets, our values. We need to work on ourselves. We need to improve our interior conditions. And yeah, there is that. But perhaps there's also something else, something more radical to be done, perhaps. And the idea of the mindset shift can be linked to the work of Donella Meadows and her writings around leverage points for systems change. And specifically this leverage point, and I quote, change of the mindset or paradigm out of which the system, its goals, structure, rules, delays, and parameters arises. So change of the mindset out of which all of this arises. However, that's only the second deepest leverage point that Meadows identified in her work. The deepest or highest leverage point is transcendence, the power to transcend paradigms. And I'll read a little bit of Donella Meadows' writings here because this is a critical piece. And she says, it means to get at a gut level the paradigm that there are paradigms and to see that that itself is a paradigm. It is to let go into not knowing. Everyone who has managed to entertain that idea for a moment or a lifetime has found it to be the basis for radical empowerment. And she goes on to say, if no paradigm is right, you could choose whatever will help you achieve your purpose. If you have no idea where to get a purpose, you can listen to the universe or put in the name of your favorite deity here and do his or her will, which is probably a lot better informed than your will. And it is in this space of mastery over paradigms that people throw off addictions, live life in constant joy, bring down empires, get locked up or burned at the stake or crucified or shot and have impacts that last for millennia. End of quote. Now, I don't know about you, but I would rather not get crucified or burned. I think this is quite flippant, this part of her essay. But it's an interesting point, and I would say we need to penetrate more into this. What is actually in here? What does it mean to listen to the universe or to God, or whatever else you might want to put there, right? The divine will. If we don't look more deeply, then we can get that terribly wrong. Start spiritually bypassing or become awfully grandiose in our visions for a better future. So we need to look at that very carefully. But to be fair to Meadows, she also says, and I quote, there are no cheap tickets to mastery. You have to work hard at it. Throw yourself into the humility of not knowing. In the end, it seems that mastery has less to do with pushing leverage points than it has to do with profoundly and madly letting go. End of quote. And all those writings, all those ideas are in the Donella Meadows project. You can find that online. Leverage points, places to intervene in a system is the name of the essay. So is this in the IDG framework, this idea of transcendence? Well, maybe a little, maybe through presence, maybe through complexity awareness or humility. But my sense is that it's not really fully there. There's something that kind of goes deeper that has to do with this letting go, relinquishing, this notion of liminality. And here we can really draw from transpersonal psychology, because it is a field that grapples precisely with these kinds of questions and with how to do that. But before I go there, it feels like a good time to take a breather, to stop there for a moment and to see what's bubbling for you. How are you seeing this? How is it landing? What are you sensing? So I'm going to pause and just see, is there anything that you'd like to share as a reflection, listening to this? I know I've given you a lot of food for thought there. Yeah. Yeah, Henry, come on in.
Could probably hear me now.
Yes.
It was on my head. Yeah, I was just really, I was really enjoying listening to you bringing in these different perspectives, because I was at the IDG summit online. I didn't attend it in person, and I felt it was really good, I thought. And there was a lot of positivity around it, and they sort of pointed at the fact that that who here is skeptical about the IDGs, and some the people who are fully on board with it. But the sessions which I attended, I really didn't feel like they went into this area in a great deal of depth. It was like an admission that, right, you're here, you're attending, therefore you buy into this stuff, so we're just going to go into it. And I did feel like there was quite a lot missing around the points that you were making. But at the same time, I sort of see it as something that has built a movement very, very quickly, which is impressive. To me anyway, that in 3 or 4 years, you can build this momentum where people are talking about inner development in a way that seems accessible, whereas before it seemed quite intangible and almost people wouldn't go there. So I'm not sure I like the term gateway drug, but I normally talk about it as a bridge to kind of access this broader field. So I just wanted to appreciate what you were putting forward, and I was furiously writing notes about, all those criticisms, because there were a few in there that I hadn't considered, and yeah, it was just really interesting to listen to for me.
Yeah, thank you, Henry. And I certainly also appreciate the efforts that have been made by the initiative. And I think it is valuable in terms of building bridges and opening up, this whole field. But yes, it does feel like we need some stepping stones, or we need to kind of look at the whole spectrum, and really notice what kind of invitation does the Inner Development Goals Initiative make, and what are the underlying concerns, perhaps, or what is it that we need to keep in mind when we approach inner development through a particular framework. Yeah, I'm just seeing Anna's comment there in the chat. Loving that you took transcendence and Meadows into this. Yeah, another quality that I know some in the global south have suggested is forgiveness. Okay, thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, that feels like that's a real big one actually as well, isn't it? It doesn't feel like that is there either. Yeah. I'm curious whether you'd like to say something about that, Anna. Are you still with us? I'm just having
I'm with you. I'm sorry, I'm not putting on the camera. I don't think I can say. I just heard this suggested as one of the qualities that should be there. And I understand from what point of view that comes. So I was thinking maybe you have something to say to that. And I think thank you, Henry, for starting the conversation. I think also something in me is saying that we just need to hold that tension, that it's a framework constantly evolving, and it's not like the end product, but it's just a tool to make us understand what we can do and what sort of qualities we can thrive towards or cultivate in order to do something, because the action in the end is really important, I think.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anna, for weaving that in. And it does feel like, depending on what spiritual frameworks we look at, there are a number of concepts that are perhaps not represented or not put into words that feel important. And that sense of forgiveness, I think it can be woven in, but it hasn't been foregrounded in the framework. And I'm curious how, as this framework moves forward, as the dialogue moves forward in and around the world, in many different places and spaces, whether there will be iterations or multiple versions of this framework, whether that is the way to go, so that it's context specific, that it feels like it's true to a place and a space. Yeah. Ruth, you're saying these questions remind you of the debate around the corporate embrace of mindfulness and this sense of commodification that has happened as well. Yes. And we hold this, right? We hold in mind that mindfulness has been incredibly valuable concept and practice in many different places and spaces, as has improved health and well-being of innumerable people. But at the same time, also, it has been decontextualized and secularized, and there are consequences to that. Yeah. Barbara, come on in.
Thank you. And I don't know if I'm going to be very coherent. I haven't really sorted all of this out in my mind, what I want to say. It's so complex. And, there's so many different, opinions and biases, and at the same time, there's a lot of people who, are, saying, yeah, we have to do something for the environment, at the same time going buying plastic, buying food which is being sprayed by pesticides, and so quite often there's a lot of talk without action. And for me, I think we can all do something to reduce waste, to make some kind of positive impact in our daily lives. And we can't expect them to work it all out for us, but we can all do something. I think we all know that we can contribute to reducing waste and all sorts of stuff. We don't really, is it carbon? Now, I have to admit, I worked in the oil industry for 20 years. Now, and there's so much debate, what is carbon the real issue? Is it deforestation? Should we grow more trees? And I would just love to see people, with these different opinions coming together and having real, open, honest conversations. But as humans, we don't seem to be able to do that because we have so many biases and so many, desires and so on. So what's come up for me, is a thing, during this conversation, and sorry, it's kind of rambling. One thing stuck out for me when I lived in India, and I read the Bhagavad Gita. I took away one key thing about whatever you do it with the right intention. And I think, having the sustainable goals, having this, having that, what is the intention? Now, there's a lot of organizations which have the intention to make money, to take control. What is their intention? And, I think that's so important, to be from an intention, just like in the medical fraternity used to say, do no harm. And I would like to see more of that kind of, like, what's our intention here? What is, and now, and then another good thing is apparently Pluto's going into Aquarius, and it's first time in 20 years, and not everything's going to change. So who knows?
Yeah, that's acknowledging the wider cosmological perspective.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I'm optimistic, you know, and I think if we can be optimistic and all do something rather than say they're not doing enough and they're not doing enough, let's all do something and
Yeah.
do things with the right intention. That's and have fun, because we're all going to die. You know, we're talking about death.
Barbara, thank you.
Thank
And
you.
thank you for sharing yourself so honestly there.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, I'll move us forward into the second half of the presentation, and we can feel together a little bit more into these questions around what can we do, what is ours to do, how are we, how can we move forward? And what is the role of transpersonal psychology there in all of this? So let me share my screen again. I hope you can see that well. Just make it a little bit bigger. So what I would like to suggest is that transpersonal psychology offers us a very helpful, quite broad container for exploring all of these ideas. Transpersonal psychology is a whole person psychology that invites us to live in full engagement with the whole of our humanity, our multiple ways of knowing, such as our emotions, our somatic ways of knowing, alongside our rational intelligence. And it also invites us to live beyond our ego identifications. And what you see on screen here is a well-known definition by Glenn Hartelius, who has looked extensively at transpersonal psychology to transpersonal field, and then generated this definition. Transpersonal psychology is a transformative psychology of the whole person, embedded within a diverse, interconnected, and evolving world that pays particular attention to states of consciousness and developmental models reflecting expansion beyond conventional notions of self. And transpersonal psychology also acknowledges really that we're living in a more than human world, that it extends, it extends us, it helps us to extend beyond the known. It helps us to recognize that the heart of life is this sense of mystery, that not everything can be known. And I've chosen this surrealist artwork, Creation of the Birds, to symbolize this human need and endeavor and existential predicament. You see here this sort of mysterious scene of a magical figure in a kind of alchemical laboratory. And this figure is human, but also more than human, engaged in this process of exploration, research, but also creation, manifesting. And there are these symbolic elements, birds, eggs, and the celestial bodies outside those windows. Symbolizing transformation and transcendence, and perhaps this search, this soul search, this longing for realization of our soul. You can see the violin there that is placed at the heart. And how is this realization brought about? How is something manifested? Through engaging with nature and with these cosmic powers that Barbara was just referencing. Speaking of, what is happening astrologically speaking. So the transpersonal lenses and perspectives invite us to engage with this more than we think we are. There's a kind of surrender to realize a kind of deeper innate nature, something which is beautifully expressed in art. Speaking of art, here's some of the artwork from our students who engage on our master's program in consciousness, spirituality, and transpersonal psychology. We encourage a lot of art making and sense making through creativity, through visual art and storytelling and so on. So yes, transpersonal psychology has this holistic approach or a way of working, inviting whole person and whole world engagement and journeying from that sense of ego to eco. That's become a popular phrase, popularized by Otto Scharmer at the Presencing Institute. But what we're talking about here, it's kind of a shorthand for exploring expanded states and stages of consciousness. There are many different models in transpersonal psychology, as some of you know, and these models move us towards extended states of expanded states of being. And many also propose that there are stages of consciousness along which we advance, psychologically growing up, so maturing, but also spiritually waking up, right? Transcending that ordinary sense of self. So there are maps that that kind of show us, give us pointers towards that journey of transformation, helping us understand that that transformation is not just an inner transformation, but it's also embedded within the wider world, which is also evolving. So there's this continuous entanglement with the world at large, and the world at large is evolving as we are evolving, as we change in our being and in our sense of belonging and becoming. So here is one little visualization of integrative development. We look at this with our students in our masters. In transpersonal psychology, there's this invitation to engage in integrative development by honoring our many ways of knowing and by drawing on those ways of knowing to make sense of our world. And there are quite a few different models of practice that have evolved here in regard to integrative development to try and meet the needs of our time, and they're blending spirituality and psychology and psychotherapies. There are a lot of different models, but Michael Murphy and George Leonard stand out. They did work at the Esalen Institute over in the United States. Ken Wilber, Terry Patton and colleagues who work in integral psychology, and then also Jorge Ferrer, Ramon Albareda and Marina Romero, who have done a lot of work in this field. And always there's the recognition that this is an ongoing practice, that this is not done quickly. It is a lifetime's work. We engage in this also with a sense of not outcome orientation, but a process orientation. We do the work for the work's sake. We're engaged in something because it's intrinsically valuable. So not necessarily this goal orientation. And that sense of these practices are synergistic. We work with different modalities, engaging the somatic, the spiritual, the rational, the emotional. But as we're engaging with these different practices, they have ripple effects across the domains. Yes, so then integrative development, in a way, invites this cultivation of the emergence of the whole person. And this emergence is participatory in nature. It happens in relationship with our inner worlds and our outer worlds. It happens between us. There is context. So we're not just this isolated flower floating in the middle of nowhere, but we're embedded in a context, and we're embedded, in a particular place and space. And that informs and shapes how we unfold our potential. I'd love to hear from you in the chat window. I'm just going to stop the screen share there for a moment. I'd love to hear from you what your sense is. Which ways of knowing are most familiar to you? What do you engage with as a way of working on yourself? I'm just curious what is kind of predominant between us. How many of us are more working somatically? How many of us are meditators? Engaging more in the spiritual domain? How many of us are creatively inclined to work with the arts? Have a feeling into that and think, what is it? What are you sensing? What is your way of working? Or share a little bit what ways of working are most familiar to you. I'm just watching the chat window there. And I'm also seeing there's some really interesting comments that came in earlier. Yeah. Thank you for those. Yeah, and nod there to Phoebe Tickell's work. Yes, lovely. Yeah. Moral imaginations. Yes, absolutely. Yes. Mm. I'm just pausing a moment still to let you think about how you're working. Intuitive, says Barbara. Getting insights when you're running. It's interesting, isn't it? How the physical and the physical can bring about the intuition. Yeah. Yeah, I work a lot with movement and dance practices, expressive dance, and I find that really helps me to galvanize thinking. So when I write, even if I write a paper, I like to move. Yeah. Balancing cognicentric versus being more intuitive and somatic. That's interesting, isn't it? How that gives us that sense of balance. Yeah. Thank you, Scott. Ruth says, I need to cast off the familiar to reach beyond language, to embrace uncertainty. How do you do that, Ruth? How do you cast off the familiar? Do you go into places and spaces that are unfamiliar? How do you embrace uncertainty? If you could type something into the chat window there, if you feel like sharing, that would be great. And Pierre says quite a few different modalities here. Wonderful. Hypnotherapy, Gestalt therapy, running as well. Yeah. Ecological design thinking. Oh, Schumacher College. Wonderful. Cooking. Yeah. That's quite an alchemical art. Yeah. It's really valuable to notice what is dominant for us and what is it that we could encourage more within our being, you know, where are our growing edges. Yeah. Oh, I love what's coming in here. Yeah, symbol drama. Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. Okay, I'll hop back into that screen share and take you through a couple more slides. So within the realm of integrative development, there's also a really interesting differentiation, which I think is worth considering as we're sitting with notions of inner development and how inner development can aid outer action, galvanize us in our outer collective action. And that has to do with this differentiation between practice and training. So in integrative development, it is said that all dimensions of our being ought to collaborate as equals in our unfolding, in our growth. And Jorge Ferrer, who's written in this field, differentiates between integrative practice and integrative training. And integrative training is more structured. It's more not linear, but more rigorous in the sense of that we're making a commitment to be a little bit more goal oriented, lean a little bit more into a kind of masculine active stance. Integrative practice, on the other hand, is more process oriented and it's more autonomous. We're handing over control in certain ways. We're trusting something of an inner unfolding that is taking us on a journey that we don't quite know, where we will end up. So why is this important? Ferrer notes that in many industrialized countries, cognicentrism, the mind, rational mind, prevails. We're mind dominant. And so we're often focused on, we're leaning more into the idea of training as a way of acquiring and honing skills, right? Just as I said earlier on. So we're perhaps less familiar and less comfortable with the idea of practice, which involves this kind of surrender, this letting go, this trusting that our intelligences will guide us. They may even be so repressed that they will struggle to emerge and to come through. Those voices have been dimmed, right? Maybe through our education, for example, right? Where cognicentrism has been encouraged. The rational mind has been nurtured, but less so our somatic intelligence or our intuitive intelligence. And that stops us from truly exploring those deeper levels of being. It kind of prohibits, it represses access to our full range of capacities here. So we can run the risk of undermining the very conditions that we need to cultivate for healing and creative unfolding. We're sort of repressing the very thing that we need for our integrative development. So there's something here that, that I'm speaking to that feels quite childlike, inviting in how we were as children, how we trusted and went with a serendipitous flow that is a little bit lost in our modern world. And I'm curious how you perceive this, and we can talk about that in a moment. But is it represented in the Inner Development Goals framework? How might it also be interpreted by organizations, right? How can we help organizations to get this more feminine, more fluid, more playful way of working? Does it maybe have to do with creating agendaless reflective spaces that allow a kind of natural unfolding of dialogue and inquiry? Or might it involve using more storytelling and arts-based methods for mapping or for sharing our journeys? If we don't want to quantify everything, so welcoming this other way of working a little more. And I'm curious what you think about that. What kinds of conditions could be cultivated in our organizations to support and welcome this process orientation? Hold that thought. I want to just go back also lastly to transcendence, which we touched on earlier. And it's quite fun that I put some prompts into an image generator to see what would come up. So this is AI providing imagery. The first one was initiation culture, which has thrown up these maybe slightly stereotyped images of indigenous ritual and more esoteric more esoteric ritual. It feels a little bit stereotyped, but at the same time, as I was doing that, there were other people using the platform, and they were generating images of futuristic American optimism, which I kind of thought was quite funny, given the day it is and the kind of topic that we're exploring. So I just wanted to share that image that popped up there for me. Curious about that image and what it elicits. Yeah. But transcendence. So this coming back to this notion of transcendence of paradigms. How can organizations do that? How can they honor this highest leverage point, the power to transcend paradigms? Can they do it? In spiritual traditions, transcendence is sometimes framed as this ego death, or maybe in softer terms, ego attenuation, as I mentioned before. And in shamanic cultures, we also find these initiation rites, right, which involve existential risk. There is this invitation for us to work with death. And could it be helpful? Could this notion of ego attenuation and liminality be helpful in our world today? And my sense is yes, absolutely. And play and imagination have a big role to play here, helping us tap and work with liminality, because play loosens identity structures. It can help us accommodate the evolving world, help us adjust in our self structures. It can bring fluidity and loosen something up that is otherwise perhaps rigid and set in terms of our ways of perceiving and thinking and doing. So play. Plunging into irreverence, into playful experimentation that can untether us from our habituated ways of doing and being. I wrote a paper about that. It's in a journal on presencing leadership and coaching. And again, I can share the link in a moment when I deactivate the screen share. But I'll add one more thing. And I know I'm throwing a lot in here, but there is something that the psychotherapist Francis Weller has written about and talked about. And that has to do with the distinction between, as he calls it, trauma culture and initiation culture. And he suggests that the sense of trauma, and that we're finding ourselves in a trauma culture today, is becoming more prevalent. And what he means by that is that we're encountering a lot of processes of uncontained initiation. We actually don't know anymore how to engage with liminality. We don't have the containers for it. We used to, but we don't anymore. That is his proposal. And it's based on his comparing his work in therapy with work that he has done in ritual and on working on initiation in community settings. And I want to just read a little section from a paper of his where he unpacks this. And this is what he says. What these patients in this therapeutic setting were going through, and how similar the process was, is that in any initiatory process, there are three things that happen. First, there's a severance from the world that you knew. Then there's a radical alteration in your sense of identity. And then there is a profound realization that you can't go back to the world as it was. So in true initiation, you don't want to go back to the world that was. Initiation is meant to escort you into a wider, more inclusive, participatory, and sacred cosmos. Trauma, on the other hand, has the inverse effect. The same three things happen. There's a severance from the world, there's a radical alteration of identity in a sense, and you can't go back to what was. But what trauma does to the psyche is that it reduces it down to a singularity. I become cut off and severed from that sense of being engaged with a wider and more encompassing sense of identity. I become isolated in the cosmos. So what distinguishes these two things is initiation, what I call the contained encounter with death. The containment was provided in earlier times by the community, by the elders, by the ancestors, by rituals, and by the spaces themselves. In trauma, there is uncontained encounter with death. There's nothing holding you where the same precipice is approached. You are left naked. Nothing is holding you. End of quote. And this is coming from an article that was published in the Cosmos Journal on initiation, trauma, and ritual. I think that's a really interesting observation. And it does point to this need for a deeper and wider container. And how can that be achieved in today's contexts, in our organizations, in the places we find ourselves, in our communities, so that we aren't left hanging as we navigate so many transition points and so many liminal spaces as we are thrown into encounters with death. I'm going to stop there. That feels like a big cliffhanger. But I am very curious, and I want to leave some time for reflections in terms of what you think and sense, what all of this means in terms of inner development in organizations. I actually do have some do's and don'ts, but maybe I'll show them right at the very end, because I'm curious what it is that you're thinking we can do, and maybe what we shouldn't be doing so much anymore. So I'll just open the floor again and want to see and hear what it is that you feel and sense. Yeah, Zoe, come on in.
So, hi everyone. Thanks, Jessica. I think that this is really very, very thought-provoking. So I did a little mind map as you're talking, and I think this kind of feeds into conversations I've been having. So my background is purely 25 years in human resource transformation in the workplace. And what I'm hearing is systemic change and transformation on a very large scale, social change. I hear we've got crisis in health. I hear we all have, not all, we all, but the health crisis is telling us that we need to have a belonging, a sense of meaning and fulfillment, because this is what we're lacking, which leads us to the self-management, the self-mastery at an individual level, because leaders are leading other people. And if they're not self-actualized, then what are they leading? And then that brings me to kind of, we spend a third of our life at work. So how and what's the common denominators of all of this is HR. The kind of gatekeepers of corporate education, leadership management, and leadership development, and I know I've had conversations with people on this call, there's something bubbling around for me, which is this whole gap around what needs to happen and how HR need to take the lead or do things differently than what they are today to help the workplace. And I think that that is a very, very important topic. I don't have answers. That's possibly what my PhD submission will be, but there is something fundamentally broken in the human resource management area. And I say that with respect, that is going to be so critical, especially when we look at Gen Z and Alpha and beyond, generational gaps, which is another component. So that's rattling around in my brain, which is a lot. And I'm not sure I've articulated it that well. But for me, there's a big hole here that needs to be explored. I'd love anybody else's thoughts on that. But thank you. Very, very thought-provoking. Loved it. Thank you.
Thank you, Zoe. And I definitely also don't have all the answers. More questions than answers. So I'm curious what is alive in others as you're speaking there. And yeah, what reflections are you sitting with? Anything else that wants to be shared?
So hi, Jessica. Sorry,
Hi, Scott.
I was on a research design webinar with the master's program. So some of you may know I work for a very large financial institution, Deutsche Bank. Been there about 12 years now. And I've witnessed quite a bit in my 12 years there. And I have a day job in finance, but also a wellbeing lead. I teach mindfulness and I teach yoga. So what I'm seeing, and I think it broadly reflects across the rest of the industry, is an increasing focus on culture and focus on, shall we say, behaviors which were perhaps acceptable 30 years ago in the city are just not acceptable today. And you're seeing a more focus on the other and on decency and, shall we say, respect for others, which also extends to things such as non-financial objectives, such as diversity and inclusion, focus on belonging, and increasingly today, topics relating to sustainability, which has a regulatory focus, but also, I guess, a selfish focus in terms of its opportunity for people to make money. But people are increasingly recognizing that this is the right thing to be involved in, and I think people take some pride in that. That all said, the idea of ego death within an institution as large as Deutsche Bank and any other organization, given its hierarchical and identity-led and to some extent power-driven, is another challenge altogether. But what I'm seeing is progress in terms of more transpersonal topics and studies and agendas being introduced or infiltrated within organizations without calling it transpersonal in that sense.
Thank you for those reflections, Scott. And as I'm listening to you and Zoe, I'm seeing future sessions where we can foreground your experiences and, we hear your stories, because I feel this is really important, and it's great to hear your perspectives. Thank you, Scott.
Mm-hmm.
And I can see a number of people with hands up. So I think it was David and then Doreen and then Wally. So we'll start with David.
Okay. Can you hear me? Just checking.
Yes, we can. Keep the mic a bit closer. That's great. Yeah, thank you.
Better. Okay. Yeah, so first of all, just really thanks very much, Jessica. That was really fantastic. I suppose just my reflections are taking us a little bit back to the IDGs, and the final point that you had there about where's the place for transcendence in it, in that as a framework. And I think what I take away from your presentation and this wonderful distinction between a healing, what was the phrase? A trauma culture and an initiation culture. I'm going to be using that again and again and again. That there's a way, we're back to, what Rowson said, really, it seems to me, which is that let's demand of the IDGs only that which we can ask of them, and not more. And let's not then make the perfect the enemy of the good here. And what I mean by that specifically is that what we really need, and I think in some ways this relates to Scott's reflections just now. Yeah, how can you see ego death being, or indeed Zoe's earlier about HR? How does ego death get brought into an organization? It's very, very hard to even conceive what that might look like. But if, on the other hand, we think that that's not the challenge, but the challenge is rather a broader cultural shift, then people can do ego death in their private time, basically, right? And that will just completely transform the whole organization of cultures within organizations in the meantime. And similarly, let's not expect this of IDGs. But just final thought really here is that when you were talking about, is there room for a sort of for initiation, for as it were, playing with death, right? It seems to me, yes, absolutely. And it seems to me also that this is precisely how we can recapture or reconnect with some element of childhood. Because what we're talking about here is the way in which if I have a motto about what a good life looks like, it's deadly serious play, right? It's playful, but it's deadly serious, because what could be more serious than that you've lived your life well, and that when you die, you know that. But that is an adult, that is a grown-up thing. So this is play, it is childlike, but it is a process of initiation. It has to be held by others. And I think this is the final thing, is that we can't do it on our own. So we're back to where I was saying about redeveloping new cultures where we support each other in this deadly serious play.
Thank you, David. That was wonderful. And I completely hear you. Yeah, thank you. We are going to, I think, go a little bit over time, but I think that's okay. Some people may need to nip off at the top of the hour, but I would like to encourage Doreen to speak, and Wally as well, and not curtail your contributions, because I feel this is a really valuable dialogue. So let's take that little bit longer to round off the conversation. Doreen, come on in.
Thank you very much. I will keep this quite short as well. So I'm actually from the IDG core team. I am the communications coordinator, and I've come to this kind of gathering without my badge on, out of pure curiosity and pure emergence. And it has been, your presentation has been so insightful and thought-provoking, and I agree with everything you say. And I know many in the organization also do agree. So yeah, my being here today is just, I'm just trusting the process. I'm exactly where I need to be to then take these thoughts back to the kind of leadership team and to the wider team. I'm going to the island next week for the ambassador program. And I think these criticisms and ideas and also insights, from other people here in terms of HR and also large organizations have been really insightful, because we have these tensions within the organization. How can we not, we don't want to scare people away by being kind of too woo-woo or, too untangible. So, but then I think a lot of people are not getting the message because we're skipping out on the things that are really important to them. So it's a really delicate balance. And as the communications coordinator, it's places like this are amazing to get these insights. So I really thank everybody for sharing, and to you as well, Jessica, for bringing these up, because we do really care about them within the IDGs, and we do want to walk the talk, and yeah, solve some of these things. So if my being here today is kind of a bridge in that direction, then yeah, perfect.
Thank you, Doreen, and welcome. That is super. It's really lovely to have you here. And yes, it would be great to continue that conversation and to build those bridges. because it feels like this is so juicy. There's so much here for us to explore. Thank you for being here. Fantastic. Yeah. Wally, what would you like to weave in? Welcome.
Thank you so very much. And it's really great to have this dialogue. I'm speaking with a bit of a sore throat here, so forgive me. I wanted to share two things. One is a personal practice that may be a benefit to others as well, and its connection to a topic and a theme that was the subject of a paper I wrote that was just published, actually, that may be beneficial to many of the debates we've been having about both IDGs and SDGs. And so the personal practice is actually one that I was able to formulate over a number of years under extreme conditions of safety that actually allowed me to experience, as it were, a mini death of ego, a mini ego death, in the context of what some might describe as both perhaps initiation, but possibly bordering on the traumatic. And I say that somewhat seriously, but also lightheartedly, because it does expose so much of what we've discussed here in terms of, recognizing that bridge and boundary between early childhood and later on. So it's in the context of family dynamics and what happens every time I open the dishwasher, a mechanical dishwasher. And of course, the reality is that everybody has a different view about how dishwashers should be sorted, loaded, and unloaded. And so it really is a wonderful, poignant metaphor for a couple of things. One, the reality of individual schemas, right? And also the ways in which individual schemas can actually conflict or bear tension with collective schemas of how the world should operate. So this is the context of goal concordance or goal discordance, which is the subject of a paper I'd be happy to share here with everyone if that's useful, and specifically how to resolve that. And it actually requires that we, as it were, elicit and negotiate what matters most at the individual level. And it requires that multiple stakeholders and multiple actors get involved in helping each of us actually function, be able to function at a higher state of, let's say, biopsychosocial spiritual functioning. So I just wanted to share that because it's incredibly important to recognize that in this tension between what is true at the collective level and what is true at the individual level, there is a liminal space. And certainly practices such as the one I described can be very helpful in bringing all of us to the reality that everybody has their own view of how the world should be, and that yet we all have to coexist together and work in new and better ways to prevent and alleviate suffering. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Wally. Thank you. And I want to acknowledge that, of course, within the IDG framework is perspective taking as a core skill. So that speaks directly to that sense of, holding everyone's view in mind, in heart and mind. Well, thank you so much, everyone. I have this feeling that we're seeding conversations that will continue over the months to come. And I really hope that you in the room will be contributing to those conversations, bringing in your stories and your examples of practice, because what we have here in the room already, there's a lot of experience and expertise in many different domains that need to evolve today. So thank you for being here, and I hope we can invite you in as guest speakers as well, and to bring your perspectives. Thank you. Terry, at this point, I'm going to hand back over to you. And just to say also, I've just posted a whole load of resources there in the chat window. Download them, have a look at them. These were all the resources I was referring to in the presentation. Thank you. And Terry, back to you.
Thank you, Jessica. And thank you to all of you for joining us tonight and for contributing. It's been amazing. It's been very thought-provoking. And that's what we hoped for. This hub is a community where people can can share and to explore together and perhaps bring in the latest research. So it's been a wonderful night. Thank you for that. And I'm sitting there feeling it's been very thought-provoking, and I want to take time to reflect on it. But then as I say those words, I notice that's all head stuff again, you know? And I probably want to go through this whole experience again, but try and use the other intelligences and see what wants to unfold through me as a result of this experience. So I understand, I think it's been recorded, and we're going to be posting the recording somewhere, so we'll all have that opportunity to experience it again, because there's a lot to take on. But thank you, Jessica, and thank you to all of you. And I just want to give a little bit of a plug for the next webinar, which is on the 10th of December, a slightly earlier time of 7 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time. And our guest speaker for this webinar is going to be Javon D'Angeli, and he's going to be exploring the key principles of transpersonal coaching and how they can be leveraged to support inner development within organisations. So this inner development for outer transformation within organisations, the key theme of this hub. So we'll be looking at it from another perspective, and that will be through transpersonal coaching. So I'd love to see you all there. I'm sure we will. So can have another great conversation. So thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Terry.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye for now.
Bye, everyone.